And the state's next witness or item of evidence.
Yes, sir. The people of the state of Florida call excuse me, Agent Kelly DiPietrantonio. People of the state of Florida call Agent Kelly DiPietrantonio.
Now, if you could raise your right hand if they support.
You swear or affirm that evidence you want to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Hand over to the witness box.
And you may inquire of the witness.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you state your name for the record and spell your last name, please?
My name is Kelly DiPietrantonio, DiPietrantonio.
Okay. And Ms. DiPietrantonio, what do you do for a living?
I'm a special agent with the FBI.
Okay. And can you give us a thumbnail sketch of your education, your training, and your experience, please?
Sure. I have a Bachelor's of Arts and a Master's of Science from Long Island University. Before becoming an agent, I went to Quantico, Virginia, and did my 20-week training to become an agent there. I'm also part of the FBI's Cellular Analysis Survey Team, or CAST as we call it, C-A-S-T. And to become a CAST certified agent, you have to do, just like anything else that you don't know what you're doing, you start with a basic class, very simple. It's about a 2-day class, and we learn about the different providers. When I say providers, I'm talking about AT&T, T-Mobile, Verizon, US Cellular. And they show us the records that they maintain, why they maintain them, how they maintain them, what they look like. And then we figure out all of those records, and we figure out a way to actually plot those on a map so you can visually see where these phones possibly were when they were making a phone call or sending a text message or initiating a data session. After the basic class, you're paired up with a mentor, and you go back to the field, you work your cases, you practice some of these records on your own. Then you can get invited to the advanced class. And that's just like the basic, but just a little more nuanced. You learn Google, Facebook, Snapchat, car records, very similar to how you can track a phone, you can track a vehicle. So we work with all of those. And then if you do well, again, in advanced, you continue working with that mentor, you go back to the field, you work on those cases and practice working with those records. After that, you can get invited to what's called CIRA. That's the Critical Incident Readiness Assessment, or CIRA. In CIRA, you walk in, it's not an instructor-based class. So you walk in and your teachers will say, okay, today there's a missing 3-year-old in Miami-Dade County. This is the phone number for the child's father. He was last seen with them. Find the child. And again, it's a training environment, so you have to ask for the appropriate records in order to find that child and present your findings to your colleagues, to a team that's ready to go out and knock on doors and look for this child. If you do well in that, again, you go back, practice with those records, come back, and you can take the certification course. The certification course is 2 2-week sessions broken up into what we call Cert 1 and Cert 2. In Cert 1, you will actually get a chance to sit down with the providers and meet with the custodians of record and the engineers. The custodians of records are the folks that actually pull the records for you when we give them subpoenas and search warrants and exigent requests. And the engineers are obviously the folks who create, modify, and optimize the network so that we stay customers, because these are billion-dollar industries, right? And they want to keep doing that, keep making money, and keep us as customers. So that's a really great opportunity. The second part of Cert 2, in Cert 1, we also get about a semester's worth of training on radio frequency theory from professors from the Florida Institute of Technology. So it's the same professors that are teaching folks who actually go out and do this for a living, engineers in the field. In Cert 2, we have the opportunity to learn a new software that we use. It's called ESPA. And then we also learned a new piece of equipment. It's called the Gladiator Autonomous Receiver, or a GAR. If you remember those old commercials, I think they were Verizon, where the guy used to walk around and he used to go, "Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?" Basically, what the receiver does is exactly that. It will drive every single block in a neighborhood and will act as though we're making a phone call, and will be a Verizon phone, a T-Mobile phone, a Sprint phone, an AT&T phone, and it'll say, "Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?" And it'll actually figure out what the footprint of that tower is. So if I were to communicate with a tower, or if I was making a call, what tower would I connect to? In order to connect to a tower, one, very important, the phone has to decide which tower I'm going to connect to. And it does that based on what it views as the clearest, strongest signal for itself at that time. After that, if you're anything like me, and you start your day as soon as you get in your car, you start making calls. I live in Broward County, so I'll start making my call at my house, and then I'll drive down to work, and sometimes I go down to Miami. So the ending...
Narrative and I'm responsive to the question.
I'll overrule the objection is that preface to the overall testimony. You could continue. You were driving in the scenario.
Thank you. So I'll start at my house, and then I'll continue driving until I get to work. If I'm headed to Miami that day, my ending tower will be in Miami. So both providers, in this case at least, provide both the beginning and ending towers for your records. And then you'll actually take a case in Cert 2 at the end of your training to a moot court. So it looks just like this. We go to a real courtroom and have defense attorneys and prosecutors that come in and help us. We take a case from initiation. We look at the records, we analyze those records, we create a report, we do a drive test to figure out the footprint, or what we call the ground truth of those records, and then we present our findings in a trial situation.
Okay. And how many of these analyses that you previously described have you actually conducted and performed during your career as a special agent for the FBI?
Well, not every case that I do goes to trial, so I'm looking at phone records on a weekly basis. So I've looked at over 100 phone records, well over 100. But trial is not typically that many.
Okay. And how many times have you testified in a court of law regarding these phone analyses that you previously described?
Regarding phone analysis, probably about 11 or 12 times.
Okay. And you're doing these analyses on a weekly basis?
Yes, most
Okay.
of the time, yes.
Over the course of how many years?
I became certified in 2021, but I started my first basic class. I was a tactical analyst beforehand, but you are not allowed to be certified in that position. But I took that class in 2016, so I've been working with these records since 2016.
Okay. And were you previously provided with phone records with respect to this case, the state of Florida versus Jose Soto-Escalera?
I was, yes.
Okay. And were you specifically provided with Sprint records in which the subscriber was the defendant Jose Soto-Escalera?
Yes, I was.
And were you also provided with T-Mobile records where the subscriber was a fellow by the name of Bradley Rodriguez, who paid for the phone for Tania Wise, the victim of the case?
Yes, I was.
Okay, I'm going to show you this particular item of evidence, which is a flash drive. What is on that flash drive?
These are the records that I received from both Sprint and T-Mobile for this case.
Okay, and did you and when you say records, are these voluminous records?
They are, yes.
Okay. Did you rely on those records to arrive at the conclusions in your case, in this case?
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you. Okay. And I am going to show you what has been marked as states 148 for identification purposes. Do you recognize that?
This is the report that I generated for this case.
Okay, and what is, and you said it's a report. Go ahead and describe for the jury what data you looked at and how you analyzed that data.
Sure. So phone carriers maintain a couple different kinds of records. The first is what's called the call detail record. If anybody remembers getting paper statements in the mail, you have a couple different columns. It's obviously one, your phone number, who you called, who called you, the date and time of that call, the duration of that call. It looks very similar to that. The only difference is with the call detail records is we have some tower information. So it'll actually tell us what tower you utilized to make that phone call, receive that phone call, send that text message, or receive that text message. Same with the data session. So we take those records and we marry them up with what's called the tower list. Phone companies are required to keep a tower list, and it's basically every tower within their network. But the call detail records, sometimes they'll refer to the towers as tower 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have to go to the call detail, to the tower list, I apologize, and see where tower 1, 2, 3, 4 is actually located. And that will give us the address and the lat and long of that tower. So we marry those two together to figure out, again, where these phone calls were taking place.
Okay, and the report in front of you, does that distill your analysis down to paper form? In other words, does it show the geographical area where these two phones were on the night of August 23rd of 2018?
It does, yes.
Okay, and is this a fair and accurate representation of your report?
It is.
And is it true and correct?
It is.
Okay, Your Honor, the state moves into evidence, exhibit number 148.
Any objection to 148?
May I just see it real quick?
Court's ruling 148 will come into evidence. And ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I did want to highlight something. If you recall, the beginning of the trial, and several times I've described to you the difference between demonstrative evidence and actual evidence. The significance of that is when something is actual evidence in the case, it will go back with you into the jury room, and when it's demonstrative, it can be used here in court to explain other evidence. So just bear that in mind. There was a reference earlier to a thumb drive, which is just used demonstratively to explain the actual summary that's come into evidence at this time. In case you were wondering about the thumb drive, is not actually in evidence for later purposes. Thank you, and you may proceed.
Thank you. Okay, so why don't you, and we'll go ahead, is this the first page of your summary, is that correct?
It is.
Okay, and let's walk through and just make sure that we're specific here. There are two phone numbers, correct?
Correct.
The first is 772-607-0257. Okay, which individual is that phone number associated with?
That's associated with Tania Wise.
Okay, and then the second phone number, 772-200-61. Which individual is that associated with?
Mr. Escalera.
Okay, if we could advance to slide 2. So, and I think you described a lot of this already, but why don't you go ahead and just put a briefly summarize what we're looking at here.
Sure. So this just says what I did in my involvement in this case. I was given some records. I was given points of interest for this case and times of interest, as well as dates of interest. I mapped the records around those dates, times, and locations of interest using my software, and then I drew my own conclusions from those records.
Okay, and go ahead and advance to slide 3. So what are we looking at here?
This slide just shows examples of cell phone towers. Something I think that it's important to note here is just because you see a cell phone tower doesn't necessarily mean that your phone is communicating with that tower if you're close to it. So for example, I have Verizon for my personal phone. So my phone can only see Verizon towers. I may be standing underneath an AT&T tower. My phone doesn't even recognize that tower. So just because you're close to one doesn't necessarily mean that your phone is talking to that tower. And then something else just to note here is that carriers nowadays, depending upon the location, will try to have the cell phone towers blend in. They're not always these ugly structures on the side of the road like maybe we're used to seeing. So I think that cactus on the left-hand side there, I think that is in Arizona. I think Wyoming has one that's kind of built into like a billboard of a bison. So again, just because you see them doesn't necessarily mean your phone's talking to them. And just because you don't see them, or potentially don't see them, doesn't necessarily mean that they're not there.
Okay, and we'll go ahead and advance to the 4th slide. Okay, why don't you describe for the jury what we're looking at?
Sure. So most towers have 3 sides. Some towers have 6 sides, some have 1. Those are called omnidirectional towers. But for the purpose of this report, I think most of the towers in this report had 3 sides. When each tower is placed on Earth, it's not always pointed in the same direction. So we call that the azimuth or the orientation. And that's another column that we'll see in those call detail records. The carriers will let us know how the tower is oriented, so we know which direction this signal emanated from the tower to the phone. If you look at the photo all the way to the right, that's how I'll display cell sites that were that the phone interacted with. That shaded area does not show where the phone was located. That simply is just a guide for the direction the signal traveled. So it can or cannot be within that shaded area. And then a good way, I think, to think of my report, this is kind of a weird comparison, I know, but see how those lines are straight and it's very neat and kind of sharp looking? I like to compare that to almost like a cherry pie at Cheesecake Factory. It always comes really neat, the sides are straight, but if you ever cut a cherry pie at home, it's not neat. There's cherries that fall out, and even if you were to smack that cherry pie at home, typically it's still going to be that wedge shape, and you can tell it's a pie, right? But you may have a couple crumbs that are not attached at all at that point. And that's actually a more realistic depiction of what the footprint of a cell tower actually looks like. Radio frequency is not a straight line, it's jagged. So just keep that in mind when we're looking at the report. The report has these sharp lines just to show a direction or again as a guide. But radio frequency does not travel in a straight line like that.
Okay, and why don't you go ahead, I think this is a good point, to go ahead and describe to the jury some of the limitations of your analysis. You
Sure.
mentioned that the analogy of a cherry pie kind of won out. Why don't you go ahead and describe that for the jury, please?
Sure. So a couple things just to take into consideration. These records are maintained by the cell phone companies. I don't know who's holding the device at the time. If it's a phone call, I don't know what was said on that phone call. If it's a text message, I don't know what was written in that text message. If it's a photo, I don't know what the photo is of. Same thing with the data session. I can't tell that they logged onto Facebook or they sent an email. I can only say that the phone interacted with this tower at this time on this date. So just something to keep in mind throughout the report.
Okay, and if we could advance to slide 5 now, please. Thank you. Go ahead.
Time in advance is another record that the telephone companies keep. This is what we consider the golden standard. Time in advance is a record that will it's a signal that's sent from the tower to the device and back to the tower. And based on the amount of time that it takes the signal to go from the tower to the phone and back to the tower, we can figure out with a mathematical equation based on radio frequency and how it travels at the speed of light, how far away that phone may be at the time that it made that phone call or again sent that text message. But, however, for time in advance, it's important to note that you don't have to be making a phone call to get a time in advance record. You don't have to be sending a text message. And you don't have to be within the footprint of that tower to talk to a tower. Time in advance is completely up to the network, and whatever tower wants to take a measurement of itself to the phone and back to itself can do so. So sometimes you'll get time in advance records that are very far away from the phone, and the phone is clearly not within the footprint of that tower. That's normal for time in advance. That's not typical for a call detail record.
Okay, and if we could advance to the next slide, please. Okay, what are we looking at here?
This is the phone number ending in 0257. So T-Mobile, anytime somebody signs up for their services, they keep a subscriber log. This phone is registered to Bradley Rodriguez, but again, used by Tania Wise. And it just says when they started their service, ended their service, and then a couple of other information about the actual device itself.
Okay, and if we could advance to the next slide, please.
This is the same thing, but for Sprint. This is for the number ending in 6163, subscribed to Mr. Escalera. And again, it just says when he started his relationship with Sprint, and then that the phone was maintained by him as a subscriber, his address, information like that.
Okay, and the next slide, please.
This is basically the same thing, just how Sprint kind of use it on their screen in their own program. But again, we can see that the phone ending in 6163 is subscribed to Mr. Soto-Escalera here as well.
Okay, is that this name right here, because they said Escalera?
Yes.
Focus in. Okay, and the next slide, please. Okay, and if it would be easier for you, if you would don't mind stepping down and kind of walking the jury through what we're looking at. here we are on the next slide. Go ahead and tell the jury what we're looking at.
So all of these green dots are T-Mobile towers. They make up the T-Mobile network. All of the black dots are Sprint towers, and they make up the Sprint network. I was given, as I said earlier, a couple different points of interest for this case. The first being this red flag here. That's the location of where the victim's body was found. The second here is this green flag. That's the victim's residence, or Mrs. Wise's residence. And this yellow flag is Mr. Escalera's residence.
Okay.
And-
Go ahead. I
Sorry.
didn't mean to cut you.
You can see that the towers are kind of spread out here. This area is not super densely populated. If you were to go to an area like Manhattan or Los Angeles, you would see a lot more towers, a lot closer together, much more packed and condensed. But because this area, we have less people, less devices, less people that need resources from each of the towers, you have less towers. They're a little more spread out, especially like in areas like this. I'll point out over here, you don't have a lot of towers. That's just because there's not a lot of people living there. It's very rural in this area.
Okay. In the next slide, please.
Okay, so here we have some time in advance records and some call detail records, or phone calls that were made. I'll start with this one over here. See how this arc is a little bit darker than this one? That's only because there are actually quite a few time in advance records that are almost pancaked on top of each other here. So the first one we'll look at was on August 23rd, 2018 at 8:06 p.m. And that's this outermost arc here. You can see that there's a little area that's just a little bit lighter, a little further west. That arc was 1.73 miles from the tower. This arc relates to the phone ending in 6163 used by Mr. Escalera. So that's telling us that the phone, used again by Mr. Escalera, was in an area consistent with the defendant's residence, with his own residence. And then if we look here at 8:07, 8:08, and 8:18 on that same day, August 23rd, Mr. Escalera's phone moves just a touch eastbound. And that's that darker shaded area here that we have three different, again, kind of pancaked on top of each other, time in advance records. Now if we continue on at 8:18 p.m., the phone again moved eastward closer towards the victim's residence. And we see that that arc was 0.94 miles away from the tower at that point. If we look here, these are all the phone calls that were made on this day from 8:06 p.m. through 8:18 p.m. on August 23rd. Let's look at the first one here. At 8:06 p.m., we can see that our target phone, the phone ending in 6163 used by Mr. Escalera, called a number ending in 0257. That was actually the phone that belonged to Tania Wise. That call lasted 38 seconds. It was a voice call, and again, it was from Mr. Escalera to Ms. Wise. Now, because we have Mrs. Wise's call detail records, we see that same call, but incoming to her phone right after. So it took about 2 seconds for it to register to get to her phone. And then again, the call lasted 32 seconds on her side, and it was an incoming call from Mr. Escalera's phone. Then Mr. Escalera at 8:07 and 8:08 p.m. calls two people. The first has a phone number ending in 3288, and the second a phone number ending in 8475. And then if we continue on again, just like the first two calls we saw, that kind of were the same call really, we have that same instance here at 8:18 and 15 seconds. Mrs. Wise's phone calls Mr. Escalera's phone, and then we see the incoming call on Mr. Escalera's phone from Mrs. Wise, again at 8:18. And then we have another instance of that repeated call again at 8:18 and 15 seconds approximately later. Mrs. Wise's phone calls Mr. Escalera's phone, and then we see that incoming call to Mr. Escalera from Mrs. Wise's phone on his record. All of these calls were made from a tower right here, right where those two sectors kind of intersect.
Okay. And the tower, what can you say about the tower, the final tower that's that those calls communicated off of? Is that, how close to that is the victim's residence? Close to, how close is the tower to the victim's residence? I'm sorry.
So here's our key, but clearly less than a mile, maybe a block or two away from her residence there.
Okay. Okay. And then, if we could advance to the next slide, please. So what are we looking at here?
So this is at 8:25 p.m. And then we have a couple different records that are just spread out by a couple different seconds here. So we'll start with the first one at 8:25 and 27 seconds. We have a call, an outgoing call from Mrs. Wise's phone to a number ending in 6163, which we now know is the phone used by Mr. Escalera. And that was done via this sector here pointing eastbound, the green sector. All of the green calls, if I didn't mention this earlier, belong to Ms. Wise, and all of the black calls in the black sectors belong to Mr. Escalera. At 8:25 and 28 seconds, we have again that same duplicative call, but on Mr. Escalera's record. So we can see that he received an incoming call from a number ending in 0257, which we know belongs to Ms. Wise, and he used this sector to receive that call. So towers may be in the same spot, and what companies will do sometimes is it costs a lot of money to build these towers. So once a tower is already built or constructed, they'll just put their antennas on top of each other. So sometimes you can see different layers, and sometimes it's different layers of the same network, sometimes it's different networks or different providers. But it looks like the towers are very close together, if not the same tower. The sectors are just different because remember how I said they orient their towers differently? So his tower, and specifically his sector that he used, is oriented just a little bit further north than Mrs. Wise's was here. Then at 8:25 and 50 seconds, we can see that there was a time in advance record for Mr. Escalera's phone that put him about 0.45 miles from the tower. Within 0.4 miles is Mrs. Wise's residence, which you can see here by that green flag.
Okay, so is it fair to say that Mr. Soto-Escalera's phone is within 0.4 miles away of the victim's residence on August 23rd, 2018 at 8:25 p.m.?
Correct. I would say this is an area that, or his phone is utilizing a tower that is consistent with being at or around her residence.
Okay. And if we could advance to the next slide, please. Okay, so what are we looking at here? It looks like we're looking at the time frame between 8:44 p.m. and 10 p.m. on August 23rd of 2018. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Let's go ahead and walk the jury through your analysis, please.
So we have a couple different things on this slide. I'll start with Mrs. Wise's phone down here to the south of the map. At 8:44 and 8:45, she made two calls, and she utilized a sector that was facing southbound, right here, kind of adjacent to the Florida Turnpike. Both of those calls were outgoing to numbers ending in 2218 and 7301. And here, typically on the other side, we saw a duration. Here it says -1. That's just a nuance with T-Mobile records. Sometimes they don't maintain the duration for certain calls, and when there's no duration populated in their call detail records, our software will kind of tell us that by just inputting a -1. So it's not that the call was -1 seconds, obviously that's impossible. There was just no duration noted there.
Let me stop you there if you don't mind.
Sure.
Is it accurate to say that at 8:25 p.m. until 8:44 p.m. The phone for Miss Wise traveled north?
Yes. Yep, because if you remember at 8:25, the phone was further south down here by her residence.
Okay. And the same question for Mr. Soto-Escalera's phone?
Correct. So we don't see him over here, but we do see him even further north. And again, if you remember from the last slide, he was in that same general area of her house, just like Ms. Wise was.
Okay. So go ahead. Thank you. Go ahead and pick up on your analysis.
Sure. I'll switch over to this center call-out box right here. We're going to start with this call at 9:51. That was a outgoing call made from Mr. Escalera's phone to a number ending in 7131. And then this actually, if you remember earlier, I think I mentioned that the phone itself decides what tower it views as the best tower to make that call at the initiation of that call. And that's really important because the network takes over at the ending part of that call or anywhere after the initiation. So you can skip 10 towers, you can only have 2 towers in a call, you can have 1 tower. So the phone decides at the beginning of the call what tower it's going to connect to, and then the network takes over. So here you see how we have a 38-second call. Here's a 38-second call, and it's just 38 seconds after the first one. This is actually the ending tower for this same call. So that's why we don't have a phone number over here as well. So the call started over here from this tower and ended on this tower. Now, in between those two, we have a timing in advance arc. And cell phone coverage kind of works similar to a sprinkler system in your yard. You want to have a little bit of overlap just so you don't drop calls, because again, these people are in business to make money. If you're dropping calls, you're going to leave and you're going to go to another provider, right? They don't want that. So what they'll do is they'll create a little bit of overlap, but not too much that it overflows your lawn and your lawn is overflowed with water. In the radio frequency world, that creates what's called a lot of noise in the network. And it gets difficult for the phones to hear the towers to hear the phones, and vice versa. Based on how short this call was and where this time in advance point is, you can see that it's almost right in the middle of both of those towers, which tells me, knowing that there's no more towers in between here, that the phone was likely in this area when it made that phone call. After it made that phone call at 9:52, we'll go to this one at 10 p.m. here. Mr. Escalera's phone made a call to a number ending in 8475, south of that initial call from the slide, but again using a sector that was pointed northbound, and that's this one right here. And we can see that the timing advance arc for that tower was about 1.3 miles away from the tower. I think that covers this slide.
Okay. And let me ask you this: what is the closest point that the defendant's phone, Jose Soto-Escalera, got within the intersection of Johnston Road and Russo Road, which is our crime scene?
So this right here, this red flag is again the crime scene where the victim's body was found. This to the tower is 4.33 miles. I would say that that is probably less than 2 miles away.
Okay. And does that include the outside of the crime scene as well?
Yes, it does.
Okay. Okay. And if we could go, I believe that's the last slide. If we go to, okay, that is the last slide. Okay, thank you. You can. Thank you. Okay. Agent DiPietrantonio, thank you very much. I have no further questions. Defense counsel may have some for you.
Thank you.
No cross touch, thank you.
May this witness be released from her subpoena at this time? Any objection to releasing her?
No objection.
Thank you, Agent DiPietrantonio. You are released from your subpoena. You're free to stay or leave as you wish.
Thank you.
Thank you.